I've tried hard, really hard, for so many years, but I have to admit it, I have not had a glittering sporting career. I've run as fast as I can on the squash court. I tried to bowl leg breaks for a while, not very well. I tried sprinting up the wing in soccer. I tried playing rugby, but they all got too big. I didn't. But the pinnacle remains Yoxall Under-17 Cricketer of the Year. That was mostly achieved for being enthusiastic enough to get 11 people on the field, at least most of the time, some of the time. And I did win the D-level club championships at squash once. And I did score a goal in a cup final. It was the second team cup final for college second teams at university. But it was a good goal. I'll tell any of you about it anytime you like. I can still remember it really clearly. But in general, I've just showed up and I've played and I've enjoyed it. And of course, you pick up the odd tips, because I've played with some good players. I've played with some less good players. But you pick up some tips here and there. And I've read the odd book about it. And I practiced a lot. And sometimes I even practiced with some goals in mind, rather than just, let's go and practice. So it was a bit of a revelation when I booked a block of squash lessons. And I found a teacher. And she was quite good, actually. She told me all sorts of bits of things about my game that I knew nothing about. She looked at my backhand and she laughed. And then she told me how to really do it, and it hurts. And physically, I mean, it didn't hurt mentally. I knew my backhand was bad. And she gave me some techniques, and she told me that I didn't need to run anywhere near as far as I ran. It's amazing what you can reach if you just try. And she gave me some drills that I could practice with some other people. And after an initial period of very great difficulty, because actually when you've been doing your backhand like that for all your life and now you have to do it like that, it's pretty hard to get the hang of it, actually. So I got worse initially, but then I got better, quite a lot better. And when I was very enthusiastic playing squash, I used to try and play 3 times a week. Once with someone better than me, once with someone about the same, and once with somebody not quite as good as me. Because actually each of the 3 things give you different ways of doing stuff and teach you different things and are enjoyable in different ways. And when I was really enthusiastic, I would try and get some of them to drill with me first and just do some, play 10 or 15 minutes of practice before you actually play the game. How, I can see you asking, does this relate to the road to Emmaus? And it will be a really good question. So on the road to Emmaus, they were walking, they were depressed, they were sad, they were 7 miles is quite a long way, actually. I don't know if you tried to walk 7 miles recently, but it takes a while. And then Jesus, hidden from sight, came, walked with them, and asked them some questions, and listened to the whole Easter story. And then he explained, apparently there are 322, Walter, you can verify this, there are 322 references to why Jesus was the Messiah in the Old Testament. And I reckon in 7 miles he could have probably got through most of them. And he wasn't... But they didn't recognize him. The disciples didn't recognize them, even though they could say that, yeah, Jesus was a prophet. Like, we think he's risen from the dead. He's not around. There's crazy goings on, but they still didn't recognize truly who Jesus was, even though they kind of knew lots of stuff, and Jesus told them lots more stuff, and it feels a little bit like. Needing a squash coach, that there are some things that one can't quite figure out alone, that you need somebody from the outside to come in and point out different things to you and to explain things that you can't see yourself, even though you kind of might have a good knowledge, you might have read the books, you might have seen what's going on. Like, without somebody to explain it, it doesn't quite work. And there's another similarity as well, which is my squash coach knew that I wasn't very good. She would beat me in a game. She would beat me every time, like 100 times out of 100. There's no lucky wins in squash, really. And Jesus, despite everything they could tell him about about what was going on and the scriptures and history, Jesus also thought the disciples were foolish. He said, how slow, why can't you understand? Like, you know all these things, but you don't get it. But he didn't write them off. He didn't go and just find other people who knew a bit more, who he could talk to, who would figure it out a bit better, who he could have a more intelligent conversation with. He spent 7 miles patiently talking to them and explaining to them. And he created a space where they could talk and listen to him, where they could come to trust him, where he could see the next step for them on their journey and guide them through it, just as a good coach can see the progression, knows the progression that you can take in squash or diving or music or painting or anything, and can sort of guide you to that next step. And to a certain extent you have to trust that process and trust their knowledge, otherwise because you can't see it. You can see what the end goal is and you might know you want to do that, but to get there bit by bit, that needs a coach. Or if you're a Christian, it needs Jesus, who can see the next step and try and work out what that next step is. And then as they walked, they obviously realized that there was something good here. So when he made to walk on, although they had a obligation under Jewish law to invite him in because it was night and you shouldn't travel alone by night because it's crazy, you have to invite people in and show hospitality. I get the impression it was more than, there's different ways you can invite people in. You can say, yeah, would you like to come round? And you're kind of glad when they say no, or you can say, would you like to come round? And you really, really mean it and you really want it. And I get the impression that they really wanted him to stay with them. And then he revealed himself to them fully in that act of breaking the bread. And then he vanished and left them to their own devices. And then they fulfilled the third. If you remember last week when I talked about post-resurrection, there were 3 things. He comes, he calms fears and gives hope. He reveals himself, and then he says, "Go and be disciples. Go and tell other people." And he gave 5 simple words: "I have seen the Lord." So the disciples did just that. They, despite the fact it was crazy to travel at dark, which was the whole point why they'd stopped, they immediately got up and went back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples and to share the news with the disciples. Which brings me to the next point. What do we tell people? What is the "I have seen the Lord"? Well, much as I love to tell people of my goal, did I mention I scored a goal? I'll tell you about it again anytime you like. It was from nearly the halfway line, actually. It was really good. So much as I love to tell people about the goal, mostly, as I say, I've just turned up and played and had a social aspect. I haven't taken it seriously. So I was a bit surprised, or taken aback, I guess, by other people treat that differently. In the news this week, there was a story about a British heptathlete, I can't remember her name actually, and she competed in various Olympics and she finished 4th twice. And over the last month or so, because they've been going back and trawling through blood tests and doing new tests, both of her medals were upgraded to bronze. And usually when that happens to people, they sort of say, well, I'm glad to have it and I don't like cheats and I'm glad that I'm clean and I've got the reward for it at last. It would have been nice to have it there, but now it's still nice to have it. Her response was different and it surprised me. And what she said was, now I feel as though my sporting career actually has some meaning. And so it really felt like the entire meaning of her whole sporting life, of all those hours of training she must have put in and all the hours of work, that the only meaning she really ascribed to it was the medal, and that now she had the medal, she was complete. And never mind that by any standard what she can do is no doubt amazing compared to the rest of the population. Never mind that hopefully she enjoyed herself doing that and it wasn't just a driven goal that she hated every step and she was just after the medal. It just felt like that was what she defined as success, was actually having that medal. And it made me realise that as we go and tell people we've seen the Lord, we probably have to be careful of what do we define as success, because the world is very success orientated, as her story shows. And And so if we're telling people, I have seen the Lord, maybe what the world would perceive as success is not necessarily what we would be telling them about. So for example, one message of the cross is that just because bad things happen or have happened to us or will happen to us or to other people, this doesn't mean that we can't have faith or that we don't have faith or that God doesn't care. And in fact, if our message is that, well, church is just where you come and you're happy and everyone in church is happy all the time, and then we deny that bad things do indeed happen and that we do go through hard times. And actually that also then denies the message of the cross, which is that in those bad times God is there, that there is redemption from things we've done wrong, that only Jesus through the cross can bring that redemption truly, and that he can restore us like he restored Peter. And even on the cross, Jesus faced that judgment from the world. If you remember, one of the criminals who was crucified next to him basically mocked him and said, well, you can save others, now save yourself, and so on. Whereas the other one recognised his own position and at least his own deservingness to the rules of the time of being there. And Jesus did what I think he asks us to do, which is he understood, he listened, he was compassionate, he used his own experience of being on the cross to be compassionate to the criminal next to him, and essentially healed him in that moment. And I think that is what we're asked to do. I think we're asked to be, as well as receiving the external stimulus of the people around us as training partners, we're also asked to be that stimulus to other people as well. And although we can talk and we can listen and we can try and explain who Jesus is and who we are and tell the stories like the disciples told the stories, and we can be invited into people's homes and lives, I do wonder whether mostly we're disciples in how we make holy the ordinary things like the breaking of the bread. And that's really where Jesus truly revealed himself to the disciples, not actually in the talk and the knowledge and the theology, but in the holiness of what he did in the breaking of the bread and the memories that brought. And so, sorry, excuse me. Don't know quite how that paragraph got there. So, and that message of how are we then? How do we trust Jesus in taking that next step? I think neatly actually brings us to the end of the Easter season. I'm not sure whether we're quite liturgically at the end, but for me we're at the end. We started, if you remember, we started with Lent, but then with Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday, with Peter's denials, with our own denials of Jesus, how we prevent God working in us, how we prevent God helping us become the beautiful creations that he made us. We went through Good Friday with Jesus on the cross and the redemption that he bought for us there. Excuse me. We went to Easter Day and the resurrection and the experience of the disciples afterwards, and of Jesus calming their fears, of bringing hope and revealing himself more fully to them, and that command of going and telling other people. And then on the road to Emmaus, where Jesus gives that safe space to us, to the travellers, to explore hopes and fears, to even though he knows that we're foolish, he knows that we miss the point, he still listens and patiently explains to us what he wants us to hear, and creates that space where, that resting place, I guess, for them to rest with him, and then for them to invite him in, which is a crucial piece. So my final question challenge, I guess, at the end of the Easter story is, where are we in that story? Where am I in that story? Where am I on that road? Am I still in Holy Week or approaching the cross, trying to figure out how I'm denying Jesus? When do I deny him? What do I need to lay at the feet of the cross? Am I at the foot of the cross, wondering when or how I can give him that brokenness and allow him in to heal me? Am I on the road to Emmaus asking questions and trying to figure out from the knowledge that I have, what does it really mean? Am I at the point of inviting Jesus in and saying, it's time, come and stay and tell me more, this is interesting? Am I seeing him in the breaking of bread or in something else as he reveals himself more fully? Am I retelling it to my friends, or all of the above? And do I trust Jesus to help me, guide me to that next step? Even though, as any athlete will tell you, the next step is always fearful. It's always difficult. And how, in doing that, can I create a place of stillness and freedom from, although there are all those things I just talked about, how can I create that place of stillness and freedom where I can say it is well, even though I know there is much to do, and create that place where others will feel safe to come and see me, see God working through me, and that I can see God working through other people as I'm with them. So that brings really to an end Easter for me, and we look forward to Pentecost as the next step, I guess. And all of it, I think, is about the line from Vapor, which is, how does God bring this world and us to life? Amen.